Thank you, Marta. And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today with our panel discussion. We have some amazing panelists to dive in a little deeper and discuss one of Marta's findings. I think it's important to note that today is a first step, as Marta's mentioned throughout this program, in trying to make sense of our small business ecosystem so we can help not just small businesses survive, but really thrive. And Marta, you said something at the end that really spoke to me. We can't afford to design more noise. And so what I'm hoping today is that our panelists will help us think through what are the things that we should be thinking about in our second event in November so that we don't design more noise, but we're more intentional. I'd like to introduce our panel today. We have Luz Gomez. She's a director at MasterCard for Inclusive Growth. She's local to Miami, but she has amazing national experience and now international experience working with micro enterprises. And as you heard Marta say, there's so many of our small businesses are very, very small. So Luz, thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing all of your input. We also have Lanier Richardson. He wears many hats. He is the director at the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development at Rutgers. He also has a social enterprise called CEO Chicago, and I consider him a national thought leader in the space of how do we really grow Black and Brown businesses. And I'm so looking forward to hearing all your thoughts and having Miami experience Lanier. It's going to be a great thing. We also have Pilar Guzman, because at the end of the day, we can talk about small businesses, but unless we have a small business voice at the table, I don't know that we're doing it justice. Pilar is the founder of Half Moon Empanadas. She brings a perspective of Miami, but also as a woman entrepreneur, as an immigrant entrepreneur, and as an advocate who's so passionate about this space. She understands firsthand the difficulty in accessing capital and opportunities, and not only just building her businesses, but creating an opportunity for her employees to also build their wealth. So thank you, Pilar, for joining us as well. We're going to jump right in with Luz. Luz, you give us what I love about you joining us today is you have the local, national, and international point of view. So from your experience in microfinance here in Miami and around the world, how do we ensure an inclusive post-COVID economic recovery for small businesses, and keeping in mind what we mean by small businesses in Miami from our context, from what we just heard?
Sure. First of all, thanks so much for having me today. This is fantastic to be a part of this conversation, and great presentation and kind of setting the scene. But let me do a little scene setting myself, if you don't mind.
Of course.
You know, you've heard, some recent data on Miami, but let me zoom out a little bit on the landscape nationally and maybe even internationally for small businesses. Even before the pandemic, access to capital, access to skill building opportunities, access to new markets were challenging. And under the surface, not all the businesses, all those businesses face the same experience. Black and Latinx businesses in particular have historically been undercapitalized. When I first came to Miami 17 plus years ago to open a microfinance branch for an organization called Acción, there was a huge initial demand for our services, particularly among Latin American and Haitian immigrant businesses, simply because there wasn't an existing infrastructure of community development financial institutions. So I guess just to say we've come a long way, right? But there's more to do. And I think affordable and more equal access to capital that reaches down further to low and moderate income communities in particular. I think that was reflected in the inequality that you saw in some of the data with Martha. That has been historically and continues to be a critical issue for entrepreneurs in Miami. And so, when the pandemic hit, I think some of those embedded inequalities were really laid bare, and that's had a huge impact on places like Miami. I was just looking up some data the other day, and I'll share sort of a data point that really blew my mind. The New York Fed, they released a report last year that noted just how disproportionate the impact of the pandemic was on Black and Latinx businesses. 41% or nearly half of Black small businesses had shut down as a result of COVID by April. And Latinx businesses didn't do much better, 32% shut down. So you can see how little runway those businesses had if they couldn't even last a month. So, and again, you all have brought up the issue around PPP and how so many businesses were locked out of that. And then there was this whole massive shift in business models because of this transition to all things digital. And many businesses, simply couldn't adapt that quickly. And so for businesses that are in such precarious financial situations, that such a slim cushion, a shock like the one we're still dealing with was just too much to handle. So I think we're in this moment of what we hope is a continued recovery. And to get back to your question, how do we make sure it's inclusive? I just wanted to kind of set that scene because certainly our communities have been feeling the brunt of the pandemic. So let me just, I obviously can talk about this forever, but like two things I'll mention in terms of how do we make sure it's inclusive. I think first, I would say that we need to help businesses adapt to an environment that's fundamentally more digital. The traditional brick and mortar model on its own hasn't and won't return back to business as usual. So I think the question for all of us that care about small businesses in Miami is, can business support organizations help these businesses stay nimble and incorporate elements of, let's say, social or e-commerce to tap new markets, or maybe help them digitize elements of their operations so that they're more productive. And I don't think it's just an information problem. So just providing that information and access to that information. But I think we need to be innovative and make sure that skill building is actionable, that there's tools that go along with the information that could be put to practical use. So that's one. And I promise I won't talk forever.
No, this is great.
And then second, I think, wearing my funder hat from the Center for Inclusive Growth, I think it's important also to invest in that ecosystem that Martha showed in terms of that entrepreneur support organization. Those are the folks that are providing the capital to underserved businesses, the training services. And frankly, these organizations are responding to market failure, right? They're filling gaps in services to reach the underserved. So I think it's critical that both public and private philanthropy help these organizations build their capacity to reach the businesses that need it most, to help them digitize their service offerings, and to help those organizations as well become more efficient in terms of the way they reach and serve small businesses. So I think that's a key takeaway for me. Just to give you like a quick couple of examples, at MasterCard, we've been investing in the digital infrastructure of these support organizations, organizations like Green America or the Action Opportunity Fund. We try to help them reach more entrepreneurs efficiently, helping them develop new product sets. So I think that definitely needs to be a part of the equation. So I know I've been talking a lot, so I'll stop there.
No, it's all great. Especially the pivot to digital. I've been hearing it a lot, and we'll get into procurement later with a different panelist. And I think this is a really important thing for our audience to listen to, because I think right now, I know FIU has some TA in this space, but I wonder, in your experience, have you seen it done well nationally or internationally anywhere else in really helping entrepreneurs, especially during this COVID recovery, pivot in that way? Or do you have any insight? And I know this wasn't.
Yeah. I think the constitution of our business community, you have to keep in mind that many of our businesses are immigrant owned. So I think we need to kind of be cognizant of that. Having worked with probably thousands of immigrant business owners, both in New York and here in Miami, there are probably some elements I think I would even keep in mind in this new environment. So I think, Martha alluded to this, you need to reach and engage with immigrant businesses with the level of both technology and touch. Like, I don't think you could do it all via your cell phone, right? So I think that a nice blend between that. I think you need to recognize, and I think you'll probably hear from one of our panelists around some of this, but recognize that businesses are time constrained and they need services to be user friendly. I kind of loved what Martha was saying. That's the money quote, right? You can't design with more noise. So I think you need to be designing with being user friendly, the UX in mind, make it convenient, do it in their language. I learned a lot about Haitian Creole when I first moved down here, and how to service Haitian business as well. And I have, I work with organizations that I work with in Brazil that have converted their entire service offering to the WhatsApp platform, both mentoring, training, connection to capital, because of the state of the pandemic and how bad it's been there. So I think, there's a lot to be said about organizationally trying to evolve their services. But I also think there needs to be some innovation around loan product offerings. There's a lot of cool stuff out there in terms of alternative credit scoring based on your digital footprint that could meet the needs of underserved populations, because I think those product innovations can't just be for the affluent, right? And then again, the money quote, you can't design with more noise. So
yes.
Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you so much, Luz. I appreciate your insights. Well, Lanier, you're next. After hearing Marta's presentation and understanding at least our local gaps on accessing capital, one, it didn't surprise you, 75%, I think was the number, to never access a loan before COVID. So how can we do a better job financing minority small businesses? What can we do differently? And maybe if you can share with the audience a little bit about your work so they understand your point of view and where you're coming from.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity. So I lead the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development at Rutgers Business School. And I'm on the faculty there in the business school. Our sort of frame of reference is we first focus on helping entrepreneurs get to $1 million a year of annual recurring revenue. We believe that $1 million a year of annual recurring revenue is such an important threshold. It's not end all be all, but it's a place where the entrepreneur has some customer validation, in theory, could hire one or more employees beyond just the owner. Ideally, there's some owner's comp, is really when the entrepreneur can start to talk to outside capital sources, banks or investors. And so we have assisted over 600 entrepreneurs, and currently over 40%, about 200 and 230 at last count, are generating more than $1 million a year of annual revenue. Our big goal is to get 1,000 entrepreneurs to $1 million a year of annual revenue. And I always tell my friends 1,000 times a million is $1 billion. So could our little center have $1 billion of economic impact? To do that, the focus has been on patient, flexible, early stage capital. We believe the success metric has 3 components. Obviously, the capacity building work, the connection to mentors, but ultimately capital. The way I sometimes summarize it is access to capital is what everybody always says, but access to contracts and access to contacts, right? That will help people sort of navigate. And what I started to believe probably 3 or 4 years ago was that we were doing capacity building programs, but without capital at the end. It's like workforce development training without a job opportunity at the end. So we started trying to imagine for entrepreneurs who could not get traditional bank capital, what could we do intentionally to help entrepreneurs make the case for capital? We call that, some of that is the narrative and the numbers, how to tell the story, but also how to create a financial projections and a financial argument, not just we're trying to do good in the neighborhood and we see this opportunity, but how do you tell the story of the entrepreneurs and their passion, but also demonstrate the investability of an opportunity. But then also, could we create new vehicles and vessels that could receive capital and that could deploy it to entrepreneurs? So we all know banks, venture capital firms. We all know the benefits of the local CDFIs. But I just believe, especially after last year, we have this moment in time where we can think about systemic change. And for me, it's how do we create new enterprises, organizations lines of businesses, units and CDFIs that might receive capital and deploy capital in a different way. For us, we've now stood up 3 different small funds, I would say, all of which are undercapitalized, all of which need more capital. We have something we call the Minority Entrepreneur Survive and Thrive Fund, which is really a grant fund. We made the case to our philanthropically motivated impact investors that if we had the ability to work with entrepreneurs to make a case and then to create the narrative to figure out if they had capital and they would use it in a certain way, that they'd be able to, and had a patient period where there was interest only, and it wasn't credit based, but it was based on sort of an optimistic outlook. I always say equity is optimistic, debt is, looks backwards, right? So you really want something that has, we call it dequity, the discipline of debt, but the optimism of equity. So it's underwritten where you believe there's a pro forma, you believe the entrepreneur can return it, but it has the ability in 8 out of 10 instances to be able to repay back. So it's a more flexible underwriting standard, one solution from what I heard. 2, this focus on companies that are generating $1 million to $5 million. That's where there's a whole lot of opportunity, or maybe it's 500,000 to 5 million, right? That's where entrepreneurs have been in the trenches, are trying to figure out how to get over the threshold of viability. Again, have historical, evidence of performance, of, enough customer validation, is where I believe folks who really want to see local impact. And these are the businesses that we touch and feel. They're the consumer-facing businesses. They're the coffee shop down the street. They're also folks who are trying to launch technology enterprises that need early stage capital. And so the first one was really a philanthropic fund that said, we believe in 8 out of 10 instances, if we gave, did these forgivable loans, recoverable grants, whatever we wanted to call them, to entrepreneurs, then 8 out of 10 instances, we would get the capital back and be able to revolve it to other entrepreneurs. We have an angel investment fund, which is private individuals who each committed $50,000. And it's really fun because we had everyone from, alumni of our university to, really small local entrepreneurs who've had some success, to, Queen Latifah's accountant, right? To the founder of Audible, who all said, we want to co-invest. And the structure of that fund was people write either a $2,500 or $5,000 check to form the fund, and they make a commitment to invest up to $25,000 or $50,000 over a 3-year period. And every 6 weeks, we hear at least 1, sometimes 2 presentations from entrepreneurs. And these are individuals who believe they can get a return. The target is a 13 or 14% return from investing. And thankfully, we've had the support of philanthropy that underwrote all of the cost of the fund. So the program manager, the administration, the accountant, we got a $300,000 grant from the federal EDA to do outreach. I believe that model is replicable as well. So you got a grant fund that's mostly philanthropy, people want an emotional and a psychological return and to see entrepreneurs grow. But they also, there's this other fund that says, I want to help, local and minority entrepreneurs. And I'm an entrepreneur myself, but I want to see if I can get a return. And then finally, and I'll stop, is we have a real estate fund, which is really focused on helping people of color own real estate. That really, we know it from housing, but even in the commercial sector, wealth is created by owning assets that generate revenue, assets that hopefully will appreciate over time and maybe have tax advantages. And going way back, when my father started his little bar and restaurant, we owned the building, right? And we lived above it, and so I know Motown music because my bedroom was right above the main speaker, right? But the entrepreneur owning the building, that building over time put us through college, gave us, it was an asset that we owned. And so helping more local entrepreneurs own property, own commercial property. We've created, with philanthropic support, a capital fund that allows local entrepreneurs to, we work with them to create, how to, do the transaction and underwrite it and do the evaluation, but ultimately help people of color own commercial property. Those are radical 3 new vehicles that are replicable. And again, it takes intentionality among the financiers, public, private, government, philanthropic. Each one of those funds, the largest fund has about $15 million. The smaller funds have $300,000, right? Each should be a multiple of 10, but we didn't wait until we had all the money. We had $300,000 and we're investing and we're appreciating. I believe that can be replicated in Miami. I'll stop.
Well, maybe we need to replicate you so you can come down to Miami and help us out. Look, I could talk to you all day. You're speaking my language in so many different ways. And to the audience, I don't know, somehow we have the call to keep these conversations going. We've had some of these start, but where I think we have trouble sometimes getting the traction to really, like you said, you didn't wait for perfection, you just started. I do have one small follow-up, short of having you also take on Miami. What is the right vehicle where those funds exist? What does it look like? Is it a nonprofit? Is it a quasi? Is it, could you share a little bit about what it looks like?
That's an outstanding question. So when we first started our first fund, which was a real estate fund, it was launched as a social enterprise, a benefit corporation. The theory was it was supported by the MacArthur Foundation with a $5 million program-related investment. It was a 1% 10-year loan. How cool is that? And the thought was that within 5 years, our organization could be non-grant reliant. So we had this relationship with a nonprofit that became a fiscal sponsor. We got grants to ultimately do the first couple of years of work. And we thought, the mission was after 5 years of doing the work, this social enterprise, which was not a nonprofit, but not a profit maximizer either, could be non-grant reliant. What has become the conclusion is some philanthropic investors are so concerned about private inurement and being IRS compliant that you still need the nonprofit entity. So we end up forming a nonprofit entity. So we have both. We have a for-profit entity that really is still aiming to generate revenue, to support its staff, to be non-grant reliant. But all of the other enterprises are still, if you're getting federal grants, getting capital from foundations, even though technically program-related investment can be made to a for-profit entity, something about getting past the lawyers and the risk tolerance of the lawyers has still led us to all of the funds being quote unquote nonprofit formally.
Thank you for follow-up. Well, on another day, maybe we can talk about how we need to shake up maybe policy, because we need new vehicles. That's what it sounds like.
Yes.
Especially when we want to change the market the way we do. Thank you, Lanier. I appreciate your insights. We'll come back to Lanier in a moment, but now we're going to go to Pilar. Pilar, you have such an amazing story that shows not just how procurement and capital and all these, all the things that we talk about, how this is a vehicle for, we use these words like business expansion and scaling, but you're such an advocate because you've lived this in the flesh. And I want you to share with us your story. But I also would like the audience to know that you're on the record with speaking to President Biden about what it really means to support a small business. So I also want you to talk a little bit about that. And I think, just for the audience, just remember what Marta was talking about. We're talking about very small businesses. And maybe Pilar, you can tell us a little bit about your story and how capital and procurement played an important role.
Yes, well, thank you, Ines. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry, my voice is a little bit weird. I am dealing with a little bit of cough here, so bear with me.
No worries.
I mean, this is great to have to have this kind of conversation and to talk about the realities of what we go through every day, right? As a business, I still consider, depending on how you define the small business, which was my conversation with President Biden, I raised my hand in the conversation with him, And I said, can I just tell you that a small business, and I'm thinking women-owned companies and Latino companies are of 1-2 people businesses. And so please, let's just bring the help. And I'm sorry, my kids are in the background.
Don't worry.
I'm talking.
She's also a mom-owned business.
I know, I am a mom. Can you close the door? I'm sorry. They just got it from
No
the school.
worries.
Close the door, please. Yeah, sorry. And I said, the reality is that those are the businesses that need the help. And so my conversation around this topic, it's always going back to my experience, which is how do we make my own little experience a systemic, something that serves for everybody? And I'll share with you a little bit of, what we went through. We started as a small business with one store in South Beach 13 years ago with our own money and a little line of credit, not understanding what it meant to have credit. So I want you to understand that as an immigrant in this country with a master's degree in Georgetown, I did not understand the importance of having credit history, right? Because that goes later on in my story. So the first store goes down to the toilet. It doesn't go well. We almost go bankrupt. We get evictions here and there. It's really bad. We reinvent the company and we ended up into an opportunity in front of the airport for an RFP. And so it was kind of the last $20,000 we had. It was after 7 years of running the business. We got out of South Beach and then we were in but we weren't making money. And we finally get this opportunity for an ACDVE, which is a minority certification that you can get, contracts in airports, the procurement opportunity, going back to your point. And I had to tell you that I'm always very proud to share this because it really changed the life of the company, the trajectory of my company, and the life of my family. Like, we killed it. We opened that store. And before telling you the good part of the story, which is to this point of the panel, we won the contract against all these big players without a lobbyist, just my husband and me and the architect. And then I'm like, okay, now I need $250,000 to build this store. And well, we don't have the resources. So let's go to the banks. And I did a master's degree in finance just by getting rejected by 10 banks in Miami. So I learned that I was in the square, and that's my point. We cannot expect to ask a 5, person or people business or that sells, 50,000 versus $1 million, the same requirements. It's just not, I didn't have books when I started. We didn't have books. I was an Excel, imported my bank to Excel, and that was my income tax, right? And so it was finally through a mentor. Going back to your point, that I got connected to the president of a bank here in Miami, Total Bank back then, that sat me in his office, and for 30 minutes I did my speech. I said, this is who we are, this is who I am, this is my business plan, I need money, and I need it yesterday. And I was blessed and lucky to get it financed because of the mentor. And so when I go back to this, and then we open the store, and we are the #1 bestseller per square foot for the entire Miami airport, being a small business in the airport, being a minority women-owned company, and we're embarking on scaling nationally in airports. We're already in 3 airports coming up: Denver, Fort Lauderdale, and Nashville. So what I want to say is, it is important to have these conversations. It is important to look at how traditionally things have been done. And I shared this number with Ines when we spoke. When I was preparing for the conversation with President Biden, I was reading, I was trying to educate myself more and more. And I read a statistic that I'm like, okay, here's the problem. I read in a report to the Treasury Department that for the SBA 7A loans, only 5% of those 7A loans in 2019 went to Black businesses, and 11% of those went to Latin businesses. So we're talking about the biggest institution in the country that lends to small businesses. Only 16% of those go to minority. So yes, I agree. We have to think a little bit more creative, I think, because the money is not getting there. And so I think that the procurement opportunities is one answer, is one path. And we should be putting more out there to the large institutions, especially, right? Like, what can we do to hire more local? What can we do to hire more minority businesses? And I think I'm an example of how things can actually make an impact, because I'm making an impact not only my business, I'm employing more people. I'm just building a new kitchen in Little Haiti, so the impact goes beyond the employees. It goes to the vendors, it goes to the whole system. So that's the story. I don't know if you want me to share a little bit more on anything else, Ines.
Well, what I think is so amazing is that what was between you and the success that you just spoke about was that small loan. So at the end of the day, it wasn't that big. And had you not had, to Lanier's point, the contact, we wouldn't be having this story today. Is there just something to think about, or what should we be thinking about how we can make this less of an accident, maybe more intentional? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm listening to you, and it's so remarkable about how it's by chance too, that we have to make it less by chance.
I think the three things, Alina, the fact that you have to do capacity building, the mentorship, the capital, but the capital thinking, the network, and that goes with the ecosystem, right? Like, how do we build in Miami a conversation? Who's doing what? So I mentor in different groups. I participate in different, places of the community. And I'm like, how do we collaborate? Like, who is doing what? Who's funding what? And let's sit down and talk, and let's put our minds together. So I think that that's one thing that we need to do more in Miami. I think that the local organizations, to me, and I give you an example during PPP and the crisis, I'm part of Impact Fund, a local organization. And we helped through credit union and several organizations to get PPPs for Hispanic companies. We sent like 50 companies that I knew from my network to get, a specific code. So those efforts and the local organizations are the ones that are talking to people like me, right? Like Fabiana, that is, I think she's in the audience. Like, we talk and we collaborate. And so how do we strengthen those organizations too? Because those are the ones that are talking to the small businesses.
Well, it sounds like a commercial for this event, which is collaboration, information, and strengthening our ecosystem. So on that note, I have a question for the full panel. And Pilar, maybe you got a little bit, you started already. Remember, this is an attempt. Oh, I love your little daughter.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great. She's learning from the best. Remember that this is going to be informing our event number 2. Event number 2, we are gathering people who are creating programs, policy, to strengthen our small business ecosystem. What is your number 1 call to action? And this is to the full panel. What advice would you give us as we're developing these programs or new policies? What are we missing? What are the elements or interventions that we need to be keeping our eye on?
I mean, I can begin.
Sure.
I finished. It's kind of what I just said, but to me, continue to talk to small businesses. So include small businesses in the conversation, because those are the ones that will also give you the insight. And like I said, I think that the strengthening the people that are already doing the work and they're doing good work, include them in the conversation. I mean, those are my 2 very basic things. And I love the initiative that, Lanier is doing. I think it's so innovative. I was just with a mentor of mine, an investor, and he was just asking me that, where do I go? Listen to this. Where do I go to see the pipeline of entrepreneurs where I can invest my money? And I'm like, okay. So we just need to connect the dots. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay,
I'll add just, back on my sort of platform of, we have to figure out how to get patient, flexible capital, and to not think about it as, we can't subsidize small businesses, or we can't, it's private inurement, or, we need to create community wealth, but we can't get money to entrepreneurs. I just believe if we figured out more ways to get capital to entrepreneurs, more wealth will be created, jobs will be created locally, the need for, we'll see all of these other outcomes, right? And so thinking about systemic ways to change underwriting, sometimes CDFIs are saying, we have a 2% loss rate. Well, in my mind, you're not taking enough risk, or, can we change the underwriting? So maybe there should be, maybe it's not 50% loss, but it is a 10% loss, offset by the, economic development impact growth, the new jobs created, the new impacts on communities, the new introduction of people to growth sectors. So it's, it's the systemic change in underwriting and how capital goes into companies and, how we get, new organizations. That's the way I walk into rooms. What systems need to be changed so that we can get new outcomes? And I hope that just bold sort of prodding gets us to think differently about how to get capital to companies.
You know what I love about what you just said, Linear? When we were setting up the RISE Fund at the start of the pandemic, when the traditional dollars were just not coming down to where we needed them to, and we approached some of philanthropy, so many of them said, but why would philanthropy be in the business of helping business? And so you're right, it does. We have to kind of change the conversation so we can have fully engaged partners at the table. Just out of curiosity, is there anything that you would say to that foundation, that board that said that to us, and maybe we can help them think a little differently? Yeah,
it's been hard. I mean, our biggest funder has this concern about, again, and I had to just accept it, that it must be a legitimate legal concern around we can't help small businesses. But I always make the argument that if you help small businesses, those businesses can do the charity, right? So instead of just thinking about doing charity, help small businesses that can create jobs and create wealth. And it's new vehicles. It's maybe it's nonprofits that are intermediaries, so the foundation community can give the capital to a nonprofit that specifically has an agenda of getting capital to private businesses. So it takes the pressure off of whatever the philanthropic concern is. But it really is about, we gotta, you show all the stats. Small business owners have, 10 to 12 times the wealth of non-business owners. That people of color hire people of color, that the impact. So you go with that data, but you say, look, we got to figure this out together. Can we just attack the problem that you can't create community wealth without helping somebody in the community create wealth, right? And you can't be afraid of that. So that's the argument that I'm making. I'm not sure if I'm winning or not, but I'm making it at every opportunity I can.
I'm rooting for you.
Yeah, if I could just add on to that, I think that's right on in terms of sort of innovative financing structures. I think sharing interesting use cases like the one Lanier shared. There's others, around the country where there's sort of these blended finance models that, government, yes, but also private philanthropy and also impact investors, like sort of the outline of Lanier's program. I think those kinds of models need to be elevated locally too, to show that, these can have a pretty dramatic impact on the community.
That's great. Well, this is the moment in case anybody in the audience wants to take advantage of the panelists that we have. You can ask a question. I will try to remember to look down at the Q&A so I can ask it to the panel and everybody can benefit from it. So while we wait to see if we have any curious minds in Miami, there better be some, because otherwise I know all of you and I will give you a hard time. But in the meantime, while we're waiting to see if a question queues up, I could keep you guys here all day personally. I think there's just so much to talk about. I'm going to ask Pilar a question. Pilar, you mentioned the first part of your journey, but then you also gave us a teaser about what's coming next. And I'm wondering, so we talked about what's missing, what would have been great to have supported you to get here. Are we missing anything to support you and businesses like you to get to the next level?
Yeah, great question. one thing that comes to mind is technology. And I think we talked about this, like as we scale, I need to have better systems of support. And that is a topic that is like, it's totally out of my league. I'm not in that business. And so guidance on that's, I'm saying that we need that. How do you grow the structure? How do you grow the talent? That is the hardest part. Like, where do you do the investments to grow? Yeah, I mean, as I'm looking into building different lines of businesses, where do I put my money today? Which one is the part that's going to take me further? And those are questions that I don't have clear. I'm blessed to have good mentors, and I think those are good, basis. But I just went through a program. I mentioned this to you, the Latino Network and Stanford. It's a scaling program for Latino owners, and that was an eye-opening. So programs like that, I think it's been, for me, it's been really helpful. But I don't know what I don't know. That's the question. I don't know still what I don't know.
Fair point. And sometimes we need to stop putting the onus on the small businesses. We need to be more partners with you. So that's a good point by itself.
Yes.
Okay. So Lanier, I have a question for you. So we've heard about all your wonderful and amazing projects and initiatives, but you also have a great national perch. As we go into our second event, are there any cities or any other communities in this space that we should be looking at, maybe to learn from that? And by the way, mistakes count as learning too. Good and bad that we should be looking at, draw some inspiration from.
Yeah, so, again, I do a lot of work in Chicago and in Newark. Newark just formed this, and they actually expanded it to New Jersey, something they call the Newark Fam Fund. And it was, we got commitment from Bank of America and other, impact investors to provide capital to entrepreneurs of color. Really interesting. If you Google Newark Fam Fund. In Chicago, there's a group that was a traditional lender in terms of CDFI. They just sort of rebranded their work and got additional capital to, as they say, it sounds odd to talk about, as a way to fund equity to small business owners, right? So it's called Greenwood Archer Capital. I'll find it and put it in the chat for everyone as well. Okay. Really interesting work coming out of Minneapolis after the George Floyd, murder, where again, capital is coming in that says we want to help entrepreneurs, right, and help entrepreneurial growth. I'll put a couple links. I've been sort of tracking as well. There's a group, if you Inez know as well, called the New Growth Innovation Network, Engine. Yes. And has done really good work. I sit on the board of the organization, in full disclosure, but it's a network of practitioners around the country, all focused on inclusive growth, and just completed a multi-city cohort, and really good examples coming out of Engine as well.
And whose CEO lives in Miami, so we should take full advantage. Right. So
Yasmina lives in Miami.
Well, we have just one more minute, and so I think I'll close with you, Luz. It's always remarkable to me that we forget that sometimes the most innovative and interesting work comes from our international cities and communities. Is there anything we should be looking outside of the U.S. that we can learn from and bring home?
I think you'd be surprised at how, digital platforms are really changing the landscape of a lot of work abroad. I think about Latin America, there's platforms like Mercado Libre, for example, that have literally tens of thousands of entrepreneurs that are engaging online. So I think, how do we leverage some of those technology companies for good, getting them to focus on the underserved? I think that's kind of an interesting thing to keep an eye on.
Thank you. And apparently I lied. We did get a question from the audience. So you can't leave quite yet, just one more minute, because I think it's an interesting one. So let me read it. It says, after creating an ecosystem or often creating an ecosystem requires a champion. So locally, for those of you who are not local, the Knight Foundation played that champion role in developing our tech ecosystem and in tech entrepreneurship. We're looking for a new set of champions around scaling small biz in Miami. What players exist in the space around the country and globally?
Good question. There's some innovative philanthropic partners that are thinking a lot about this work. Kaufman always comes up first as, thinking about entrepreneurship. Certain Foundation, has really been providing capital for entrepreneurial initiatives. The Rockefeller Foundation, really doing innovative work to support entrepreneurship and economic development. Those are two that are just in my world that have provided capital to us and been willing to listen to presentations. And again, national funder that, are really focused on, cooperative work. Lastly, I'll just say Living Cities is a nonprofit that raised capital from a consortium of philanthropic partners and corporations focused on getting capital, to entrepreneurs and to communities. So those three come to mind just off the top of my head.
Well, thank you. We reached the end. What makes me happy about this panel is that you're not just adding to the smarts, but also to the heart of this conversation. And hopefully the audience can see that and it came through because all of you speak with so much passion and it's what we need, I think, sometimes in a really difficult environment that feels impossible. It's not just the smarts, but the commitment and the resilience to continue forward. So thank you for what all of you do individually every day, whether at the university or at a corporate partner like MasterCard or selling empanadas. It's all so important work. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Send empanadas, send empanadas.
Who wants to say bye?
Bye.
Bye. For all of our participants listening, I want to give one last thanks to this amazing panel. Lanier, Pilar, Luz, thank you. And Inez, thank you for moderating this panel and guiding us through such a wonderful conversation. Your expert guidance is always coming through. It's always a joy to work with you. So thank you.